Okay, hello and welcome. We're here with Chris Smedley from Canada. You will introduce yourself later. Just a short remark. We were first connected by our common friend Ralf Lippold from Dresden. I think some years ago, I don't know how many, so in the early times of social media. And so what I got from you, so far I understand you're a business developer, you're an urban utopist, you're a Tesla enthusiast, as far as I know, and a Hyperloop activist. Is it right?
Yeah, and add to that a bunch of space activities.
Oh yeah, and space activities. Yes.
Yeah,
And yeah,
cool,
probably you can introduce yourself, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about you.
cool. So, like you said, thank you for inviting me here. I appreciate being able to get to speak with you guys. One of the things that I'm involved in is that I do exponential consulting for nations, corporations, that kind of thing. And out of that, the ideas of futurism come into the mix, and we go to various cities and communities and try and help them in the transition from the current infrastructure that they might have into the development of digital cities, where these cities have some different characteristics than smart cities, in that they're designed to be resilient for the environment, they're designed to follow the SDGs, but they're also modular and mobile as an inherent idea. So you may be familiar with some of the tiny homes aspects or
Yes.
RV markets or things like this. So one of the key elements is that we look at using digital factories and prefabrication in order to produce these modules, which then can either go in modular buildings, they can be part of trucks, they can be part of ships. And all of this is to give people a mobility which actually it addresses some of the conversations that we've had earlier, in that it's a mobility not only away from things like hurricanes and disasters and things like that, but away from political organizations that are problematic. So every nation state is going through these challenges, and the UN has identified that urbanization is actually a global challenge. Too many people getting in the cities, not enough space. You know, this is a common problem everywhere, especially in Europe where there's a high density of people. And so part of our discussions revolve around the idea of us breaking the tethers from land and start to look towards lakes and seas and water-based living. So we have a big aqua cities component to what we're looking at. You may be familiar that Barke Ingels, the famous Denmark architect, this year did a presentation to the United Nations Habitat, where he presented a concept of a floating city that had somewhere between 30 and 50,000 people as a mechanism for addressing climate change. And that, we expect probably 1 billion people in one form or another to be able to be dislocated over the next few years. And at the same time, there's a growing movement towards something called seasteading, which is where, people are building these large communities. We're doing one in Tahiti and other places like that. And so some of our conversations have been, for example, about creating new governance models in those locations. So we're looking at creating startup societies, individual communities, letting people migrate there, and ultimately creating new micronations. And so one of the concepts, to put it in context with the EU, that we've been working on has been the idea of creating a new Venice in the middle of the Mediterranean as a waypoint for African immigrants,
Yes, I
right?
heard about that.
As a
Yes, yes,
mechanism of saying, somewhere off the coast of Sicily, then
yes.
that would be a place to collect, and that we could set up whatever facilities we needed there. We also did a lot of work in the Caribbean, and we continue to do with the island nations there. We're having an aquatic, amphibious kind of living arrangement is far more beneficial for them because it's melded into what they're thinking. Similar conversation would have happened in the Netherlands, where, as I'm sure you're well familiar, they don't really seem to see a big distinction between water and land. It's a transitional sort of
Yes.
thing. So, we're a 70% water planet. And that's why I think that it's a good idea to start looking at how we would, move in that direction. But most importantly, it's a good idea because it's going to uncouple historical nations and move back more towards a steady state kind of model that, like nations are only relatively new, as you know, right?
Yes.
And so we think that it'll be better to have, let's say, 1 million cities of 10,000 people than it is to have 100 cities of 10 million people,
Yes.
right? And so this means that we have to look at some opportunities, particularly in offshore. And as you'd mentioned before, I have some interests in Hyperloop, but most recently I've shifted my interests from the Hyperloop towards rockets. So
Yes.
one of the key components that I have in my presentation is that we're talking with SpaceX about their Starship, and as you may have known, they've mentioned that they want to do what they call point to point. We call this suborbital flight,
Yes.
right? As to be compared with the orbital versions. And in Canada, we're talking to the government about being able to travel anywhere in Canada in under 20 minutes, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so there's a massive implication here that if SpaceX was just looking at this for long range flights, that's one conversation. But
Yes.
it doesn't stop there. So what it stops with is the idea that we want to create these floating, what we call aerospace ports. So if you take a look at how SpaceX is doing their drone barges right now, we look at that for the Starship, and we use offshore facilities like this to be the landing and launch zones for the hundreds of cities that he wants to be able to have people travel, right? And at the same time, that also means that we're building that infrastructure out around the world that allows us to disrupt not only aircraft industries, but also shipping. And both of these industries, there's an interesting twist on this, is that, as you know, they're large contributors to GHGs. And if we shifted towards the rocket ships, because they're methane powered, you'd say, but they still have emissions. But the issue is that we're looking at the same process that Musk is talking about on Mars to create their own fuel, to build machines that extract the CO2 from the air and literally use sunlight to create methane fuels.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this context, what this means is that for every rocket that you would launch, you'd reduce the atmospheric content by at least make that net zero. But also you can leave this machinery on and use that as a way of decarbonizing the planet and converting into synthetic fuels, right? So the point of this is that it allows us to get a far faster mode of transportation and at the same time start to remove aircraft and ships and other vessels, other forms of transportation. And it ushers into us this era of being able to, as I maybe said before, the internet allowed us to shrink the world to a dot in terms of the communications like we're doing now. But I think that rocket ships are going to allow us to physically shrink the world and rapidly accelerate the mobility of people and goods and all that kind of stuff. And that from that aspect, we should be looking at that. But to compare this back to the Hyperloop folks, the one big distinction here is that the spaceships don't require infrastructure like a rail line. They don't require rights of way. They don't require local community laws. They don't require any of those things. It literally is, this is something called dematerialization, where if you're going to put some tech in, just like you went from wired to wireless, if you can remove the physical devices, like Musk has this mantra that he uses, the best part is no part. So when he's designing things, he's always looking at how do we engineer to remove the interfaces? How do we make things disappear? And so when I look at conventional transport that requires billions to be spent on that infrastructure, and that's of course true of the Hyperloop, is it costs money to build. But if you were to hypothetically say, I have this run for a Hyperloop, or I can do a rocket between those 2 points, you're able to do the latter for far less money and to be able to not have this continual maintenance and update, right? So I'm going to pause there because I want you to have an opportunity to respond. I don't want to talk all the time.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. But You know, one rocket or two rockets are probably not the problem, but when you think all this human transport going via rockets, wouldn't it destroy our atmosphere here?
Well,
What do?
that's the point that I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
Is first of all, if you used hydrogen for fuel, and there's reasons why they don't,
Yes.
all the output is water.
Yes.
But if you use the methane, and Musk is written about this on more than one occasion, and you set it up as a net zero model that, we first go to the UN and say, I want to build a machine that sucks the CO2 out of the atmosphere
Yes.
and reverses what we've done with fossil fuels,
Yes.
right? And then, by the way, I have a need for fossil fuels, which is to power this rocket.
Yes.
And that from a carbon perspective, every gas emissions from the aircraft and from the ships become abstracted and removed from consideration.
Yes.
So, if you ultimately look at it, like there are, I think, somewhere around 30,000 aircraft with over 50 people in them right now in the world. And in 10 years, there's going to be well over 40,000.
Yes.
Then, that's the challenge you're trying to fix is
Yes.
if we just do that part for Musk, right, then we've got to figure out how to ground all of those planes. We've got to figure out how to ground all the ships.
Yes.
And as you know, 85% or more of global cargo, which I think is obviously the first market. I see three markets for this. The first is military applications. Mm-hmm. And I've had conversations with our government, and I know the Americans are looking at it. But consider the logistical implementation or implications of being able to drop 200 tons anywhere you want on the planet with troops, with supplies, with refugee relief, whatever you might want to have from purely a military perspective, right? And this makes conventional defenses absurd. Like an F-35 fighter, it's just like...
Connection's broken? Oh, yeah. Now you're back. The connection was broken.
Okay.
So you talked about military applications and that this concept would make traditional military obsolete.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And then, so this is why we're talking to the Canadian government about being able to move, we've got second largest country in the world. We want to go up to the Arctic regions. We have 2 million indigenous people there that we want to be able to put supplies to, all that kind of stuff. But if you're looking strictly at rockets, I see three transitions happening. The first is military applications. The second is cargo. And the third is passenger.
Yes.
You're going to have to build the comfort for people and all of that. But that also speaks to the idea of how many rocket ship flights does it take to replace like a Maersk container ship?
Yes.
Right? And the IMO doesn't have any emissions checking, any of that stuff.
Yes.
That's the big market, is literally moving the cargo point to point on the planet, not the passengers. There's far more money in that.
Yes.
So, this is an area that I think that what we've been developing is these ideas of aerospace ports, which are floating complexes, like Musk has discussed, that would produce the fuel on site, that would provide launch and landing capabilities, would be part of a flotilla. And when you look at something like Germany, we're having conversations right now with the Scandinavian nations about setting up, you may be familiar, there was a conversation, I think it was Tencent, that was talking about doing a power island to connect all of the offshore wind farms, right?
This Netherlands, they are planning it.
No, not in the Netherlands.
No?
I'm talking in the North. In the North Sea.
I know there's the very. I think they're close to starting building it to have this kind of island in the North Sea.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So our conversations are that could just as easily be a floating island.
Yes.
Or that you would add in these spaceport capabilities and other things in a floating basis. And in a sense, what you're doing is you're building the new country at sea.
Yes.
Right? You can move your industries, your heavy equipment, all of that kind of stuff onto those facilities. And then the other aspect is that when you're looking at conventional shipping, and I know that through Hamburg, you have, in the North Sea area, Germany's got a lot of container business and shipping. And the idea would be that we use the Norwegian transportation strategy of having long haul ships and then the short ones that go through the river barges, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that there would be really no reason to have those massive container ships go to the interior of Europe to do the deliveries,
Yes.
right? And so the idea is that we would keep the ships on these offshore islands, the large long haul ships, and then use the rockets to be able to cross pollinate that. Make sense?
Yeah, sounds really interesting. I'm just wondering. There's one thing because when we talk about climate change, um, we will be we will be having floods and especially strong winds. You know, this increasing number of hurricanes, stronger hurricanes, longer hurricanes. And how does this fit?
Yeah, well, that also speaks to the idea of we'd worked on building resilient communities in the Caribbean where, I don't think you guys get many hurricanes. I'm not sure what you get in terms of weather. Is it flood?
Well, yeah, we have floods, but we are building dikes like the Dutch people, and
Yeah.
the coastline is well protected. Maybe the water levels are rising. Maybe we have to rise the dikes, and groundwater may be an issue in future. But I think we are quite well protected in the northern part of Europe.
But there's a philosophical problem that comes with what you just verbalized, is it creates an adversarial relationship between those that live on land and the forces of nature.
Yes.
So we have this portfolio
old
we call
traditional Dutch
thinking,
Frisian concept. Yes.
right, with building dikes and everything.
Yes.
And to exactly that point, now they're saying it's about coexistence and interoperability. And so when you look at a floating city, and this is again what we talked about in the Bahamas, is it's immune to sea level rise, it's immune to tsunami, it's immune to earthquakes, and you can literally drive it away from the hurricane.
Yes.
You can do seasonal migrations, you can do any of that stuff.
Yes.
So, one of the interesting things about going waterborne is that the water protects you.
Yes.
Right? And whereas the problem with hard coastlines with over 5 billion people living on them within 10 meters is that when you try and defend your house against the waves, it's pointless.
Yes.
Right? And this is where we see a lot of, like you look at Miami, they spend tens of billions of dollars every year now trying to pump the water out.
Yes.
And our conversations are, you really should start looking at taking the first 5 floors of your condos and just gutting them.
Yes.
Like put the entire thing on stilts because it's coming soon.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so this is where also, it seems that mostly Germany, at least my understanding is relatively lower height buildings. There's no super skyscraper kind of things.
Exactly.
And this means that you could probably relocate people using the techniques that I've discussed. And that means that there's a gradual retreat from the seas where those places are exposed, right? Because we have 41 megacities with 10 million people globally right now.
Yes.
That are on the coasts.
Yes.
And so that's all of those people at risk. And the problem is that the current thinking you were talking in our pre-conversation is there's I don't want to call it a laziness, but there's a complacency.
Yes.
That, with climate change, with other things, and the really sad part about it is that complacency only gets disrupted when you see lives destroyed because nature takes her revenge.
Yes. Yes.
Right? So, you can be as complacent as you want, but if we don't act to protect ourselves immediately, right, and address both our emissions issues and finding safer ways to live, then that's going to mean that we're going to see, billions of people not only dislocated, but killed. And entire nations will fall because of this. Like if you look, for example, at America and their incredibly protectionist policies, and they fail to internalize the idea that you can't hold a border. If there was a massive hurricane in Mexico that made 1 million migrants, they can't very well shoot them at the border. It's just not possible, right?
Yes.
So in the same way that the EU had to handle mass numbers of migrants and all of the challenges that you had there, I think the world needs to come together under the UN and say, well, how can we handle entire nations that might be displaced or, millions and millions of people? Where do we give them homes? How do we build that kind of thing? Make sense?
Absolutely. I think we have some rural areas like in Nigeria or think about Jakarta, which is currently
Yeah,
drowning. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think probably put Jakarta on the water would be a far better idea than to kill the orangutan in Borneo for building a city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, Jakarta's talking about a relocation plan, and
Yes.
they're also talking about, well, why don't we try and find some other islands? And my whole point on this is just build your own island,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah,
why
and
not?
please do not go to Borneo. Yeah.
And
Yes.
your point about Nigeria, there's a perfect opportunity there too in Lagos, is that it is a large inland type of facility there. They've already tried to do some smart cities, some eco cities in there. But that's a perfect opportunity also as one of the fastest growing places in the world to use those protective waters and barriers and stuff like that to allow them to grow.
Hmm. And how do you see, you're living in Canada and you have all these smaller cities and villages in Canada. Uh, how do you see the future of these kinds of cities?
Yeah, so like I was mentioning before, we have 500 communities of First Nations and Indigenous people here with over 2 million people. So almost 10% of Canada's population is living north of the 60. They're usually in zones of 1,000 people up to 10,000 people,
Mhm.
right? Small communities. And one of the problems that we have here is both what we call reconciliation for harm that's been caused to our Aboriginal peoples here,
Yes.
but also that there's a massive amount of mismanagement from the government with regards to Aboriginal affairs. And so they're putting in a lot of money. Like last budget was $8 billion to build proper housing and infrastructure and that kind of thing for these communities. And so one of the things that we're like, I'll give you an example. There's a community of 2,500 that this past year, they finally got around to saying, okay, we're going to move you off of a floodplain that we put you on 50 years ago. And every year, these people are evacuated at a cost of $20 million to places where they have no homes. So they finally said, we're going to relocate you. It's going to cost $500 million to $1 billion for 2,500 people. And I'm going, you know how much a 2,500 person cruise ship costs? A lot
No
less.
idea. Yeah, a lot.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah.
But to answer your question, what we're looking at is to create domed type cities for Arctic resilience for these communities to have all of the resources be decentralized and be in that community so that every community doesn't rely on a centralized city state to manage them. They get self-governance, self-direction. And this is hopefully where we're trying to build these factories on site and give them their own capability for self-determination.
Okay, so our next presentator is here. We are on air. So, okay, he just arrived. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think it might be pretty interesting. And how would you, when you look at a timeline, yeah, so how would it look like? So how much time will it take? Yeah, I think these are incredible numbers. This is an incredible technology. Will there be steps in between?
Yes,
What do you
yes.
think? How,
So,
how long will it take? 50 years?
no, 5.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. It'll all be done before 2030. And it'll
yes,
be done before 2030 because we have $100 trillion to spend fixing the planet,
yes.
right? Under the SDGs. So literally, that's what's going to drive all of this. And we're trying to ride that wave.
Hmm.
And when I say 5 years, it's that the technology is moving exponentially.
Yes.
And so you have to be, like I just finished reading an article about how SpaceX is going to put a rocket on the moon in 2022. So our earlier conversation is, well, what are you doing with these other things, right?
Yes.
When
Yes.
when Shotwell has said we're going to be offering this service within a decade, Elon will say 5 years. You know, these are their estimates, not
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah. I think Elon is a very interesting person, and I think we have learned we should trust his forecasts. Uh,
Regardless if we trust them or not, it's inspiring to at least have somebody go, and this is what I try to do with my stuff, is here's a vision of a better possible future that we could have. Instead of us saying it will take forever, let's start building it and then see how far we can get.
yeah,
And this is, I think, is the key exercise for all of us here,
yeah.
is to move from pessimism maybe into a state of mind where you're a possibilitarian,
Mm-hmm.
right? So all of these things are possible. We just have to put our mind space into it and stop looking so much at small-minded bureaucrats and other people that are trying to maintain the 20th century and start building the 21st.
How do you finance something like that? Will it? You mentioned the SDG budget, but who will take the first step to go there? Who will spend the money, and what are the dimensions we're talking about? 25,000 people. This is a huge number already, yeah. And when we talk about Jakarta, I don't know, 10 millions or something like that.
I think there's like 30 million in Jakarta.
Oh, shit. Yeah. Okay. So 30 million.
It's a
Yeah.
huge problem.
So this is out of anything what we can understand. Okay, we, for example, regard Cologne as we say, Großstadt, big city, which has around 1 million people. Yeah, and we feel at least this is it's not manageable anymore. In Cologne, it isn't manageable, but this is a different thing.
Yeah, well, you're talking about the challenges of scale, right? And that at some point, like probably you can't manage a city over 1 million people. We all try, but
Yes.
that's the challenge.
Yeah.
And so as I was saying before, our first step is to look at energy, communications, computing, and AI as a basic platform. And then we go to businesses, large consumers of energy and other services, and we look to offer them a unique carrot, and that is no more bills.
Yes.
So in a similar way, if we just talk about energy and how Germany has negative pricing, and we talked about putting storage in and all of that, there's philosophically the idea that we want to move out of a capitalism system where we have municipal utilities that put in an inherent profit and instead revert that to behind the meter supply at the building level.
Yes.
Right. And that basically hits people right in the pocket. And that's one of the areas that we're launching all of our initiatives, is by putting in energy systems and letting people get out of the grid. And then part of our conversations would be to look at things like Starlink and the SpaceX constellation.
Yes.
And say that's another example where you can dematerialize or make disappear the utility companies.
Yes.
And their control. And that's for the idea that communication should also be free and compute should be free. And this is moving us towards this abundant society where, we have, as Jeremy Rifkin would say, zero marginal cost society.
Yes.
Right. And we implement these things one at a time. And then as, we talk about transport and all the other things as we go along. But we can start in 2020 in energy, and Germany can start now because you guys have all that renewable components that are there. The question is, how do you change the paradigm to encourage more businesses than residential to get off the grid?
Yes.
And I don't know how that works in terms of Germany.
Good question. I think we have a new culture of building mid-size organization around energy. We have these Genossenschaften. What's the English translation? Kind of communities, areas. I don't find the right words right now. I think this was a pretty nice development, but it's always like the pendulum is always swinging back. And that's what we currently see. So we had some kind of development, but now it looks like it's stuck. We talked about it earlier, that so the We lost a lot of jobs in the wind energy industry. We lost 17,000 jobs in the solar industry. And so the process is slowed down for some reason. Yeah, and I don't want
Is that
to.
because you're built out?
Sorry?
Is that why? Is that why you're like? Why is the build out of renewables slowing in Germany?
Due to resistance to change in general. Yeah.
Or is it more to the perceived high cost of the solar tariff and
No,
all
no,
that
no,
kind of
not
stuff?
at all. Because the solar tariffs are quite low. The wind tariffs we're talking about around about 3 cents per megawatt. The windmills are getting bigger, bigger. Oh, Annette is just welche Genossenschaft. It's a collective. Sorry.
Collective, yeah.
Okay, I didn't find the right word. Thanks, Annette. Um, and there was new culture of collectives here, and we had these farmers joining together to start up energy companies. And for example, we have this what we call citizen energy, Bürgerenergie, for example, that citizens come together, they rent roofs, for example, to build solar spaces and so on. But these are tiny, tiny labs, I would call, where they try, but it's not the overall system that has changed up to now.
Well, philosophically, what you're discussing is the transition from a centralized system to a decentralized microgrid oriented
Yes,
system.
I agree.
And that's exactly what we're talking about with all the resources that you would have, right?
Hmm.
Including digital manufacture,
Yes,
right? It's the idea of putting factories in the local community, doing a build out, then moving that fleet of factories somewhere else, you know.
yes,
That's probably the way that we'd want to go. And that doesn't matter what utility that you're looking at. It's this idea that when you decentralize, you give individuals more control and
yes,
thus democratize the process. And then because they have that more control, they can do their own self-governance, that kind of scenario. So your point about cooperatives or collectives, that kind of
yeah,
thing, I think that that's exactly what we're looking at doing around the world,
yes,
is to do that kind of scenario and let communities take charge of their own destiny and
yes,
not, you know, like I'll give you a point of interest is that as of November 1st, Ontario's electricity rate is due to go up 55%.
yes,
And so this is something that you know comes from the multi-billion dollar costs of nuclear power plants and mismanagement and all of
yes,
those kinds of things. And you know, this is hopefully for us what's going to be an opportunity to bring in new kinds of solar arrangements. And one of the things that I'll share with you here is that there's a challenge with the existing solar industry, particularly on residential, in that it's the most expensive place to put solar because roofs are weirdly shaped.
hmm,
That's the reality. Or you have very old historical buildings like you do in Germany.
yes,
So the perfect scenario is one where you have an open field and you've got edge to edge coverage of solar. And we're
yes,
not talking about like utility solar arrays. What we're working on is the idea of a solar canopy.
hmm,
So, you know, that you could literally cover any area with a sheet that is a solar collector,
hmm,
rainwater collection, all that kind of stuff. So initially, we're working on models of doing that in parking lots and
yes,
retrofitting existing shopping malls and flat roofs and warehouses. These are all opportunities where you can install solar easily and quickly
I agree
without
totally.
going, without going to the residential. And then one of the other really interesting things that we're exploring is the idea of creating a canopy over the autobahns.
Yes,
So, you know, we look at that same sort of concept and you say, if you could always drive and there was good weather, right? There
yes,
was no rain, there was none of this stuff.
yeah,
And at the same time, you're collecting solar energy, you're collecting water, you're collecting other things. Then the highway becomes a resource conduit
yes,
as well as a place where you move vehicles around.
yes,
And if we could do something like that, where along the way you've got embedded energy storage and other systems, I see that as a very practical way to implement as much solar as you need on existing lands without disturbing people, right? And it's only the state that has to go, yes, I agree to do this on my property, right? Make sense?
yes. Hey, just there's one complaint from Konstantin. Just come in.
Sure.
Yeah. Hi, greetings. The thing is, I have a bit of a concern because if you have such large areas like the highways and you have it all covered in solar panels, then there's a lot of money laying around on the street, and there's a lot of people who might be in need of energy too, and who might look at these solar panels and think, oh, I need that on my roof as well. And I think if you look at, for example, the USA, they have like highways which are like kilometers without any person seeing them, or there for maintenance or something. So sure, maybe in the city you could do this, but I think for highways I see a bit of a problem.
Hey, there's so much traffic in our highways, at least. Yeah. So you won't have the chance to get them.
Is
in
your,
Germany
is
it
your
won't be a problem.
is your concern about theft?
Yeah, it's. I think you're concerned.
Yeah,
about
theft or maybe just that people destroy, destruction, and also maintenance as well. How do you maintain those large?
That's something I wouldn't share actually.
Good questions.
Yeah.
So, a couple of observations. One is that our solar canopies fit inside of containers, shipping containers. So they're deployed on roadside. They can be deployed at any length that you might want to do. But to answer that point about theft, as I said in the beginning, we have a service, which we call our collaborative robot services, that include energy, communications, sensing, AI, and governance. So the road itself is really a robot. So Industry 4.0 kind of stuff. So you're going to install this solar canopy, but in there you can put in 5G, you can put in cameras, you can put in all of that other infrastructure. And so the police will come if you go and steal this, right? If you go to take it apart, right?
Actually, I think we have an issue in Germany. For example, when we build windmills, the windmills are very often built just in the middle of very valuable cultural landscape, natural landscapes, or close to some beautiful castle or whatever. And I agree totally that we have to use the existing infrastructure, like the motorways, to generate energy. Yeah, there could be windmills right and left of the motorway. And I'm a strong believer, in Wuppertal we have the Schwebebahn, or we have other similar systems for short distance traveling. So put something above the motorway to get the traffic jams off the motorway.
Yeah, and that also lays the foundation for autonomous vehicles, right?
Yes.
So that's really where we're coming from. And to sort of extend this, you may be aware that the Americans had a project called Solar Highways at one point.
Yes.
Where they got tens of millions of dollars from the Department of Energy.
Yes.
And it was on a really stupid concept, which is, I'm going to put a multi-ton truck over very fragile solar equipment, and it's all going to work just fine. Right. So you've got Wattway in France and others, and it might be fine if you're looking at pedestrian traffic or light vehicle traffic.
Yes.
But the point that we were making is, well, but either way, there are additional benefits in converting that into a canopy over putting it on the road level, like we discussed, rain management, all of that stuff, right? So we see that as a better way of covering that space, and that there's an opportunity to implement that in existing highways by starting, as we said, with the there's something called a high mast tower. I'm sure you have similar ones in Germany, but these are like 40-meter tall posts with big lightings on them that go along the Autobahn, right?
Yeah, we don't have them anymore. We had them. Belgium still have these kind of light towers.
So how tall is your lighting on the Autobahn?
There's no lighting in Germany.
So the roads don't have lights? The roads don't have lights?
Nope.
Interesting. Okay. Well, but here they're everywhere, right?
Yes.
And so this is where we're talking to light standard makers, and we're saying, if we convert those and change them into solar wrapped or energy storage or that kind of thing, they're literally just posts that run along the highway, right?
Yes.
and that we could lay those down, and then that would include intelligent lighting, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But if you've basically turned off the lights on the highways.
Yeah, we never had that.
Really?
No, no, no. It's always funny for us to go to Belgium. You drive through the dark to the border, and suddenly the light goes on because you are in Belgium. You have no border station or something like this. It just, you're Belgium, the light is on.
Well, okay. Well, I've learned something there because that's where we were trying to use the posts to be the anchors for the canopies, right?
Yes, yes.
So that would mean in Germany you'd have to put some posts out.
Yeah, you have to build the entire infrastructure there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, cables and
things
like that.
And we're looking at thin, lightweight solar, right?
Yes.
So that it's a flexible canopy rather than static, rigid panels that they have now, right? So that's something that we think we could probably implement in most places.
I think it makes sense. For example, we don't have that much snow, for example, like you or Norway. Yeah, and one of my favorite technological concepts are the heated bike paths in Norway. So they have electric loops, I think, in the path, and so when it snows, the snow is disappearing. So it's easy. You don't have to take the snow out of the city because it just disappears. It's environmentally friendly since they use water energy in Norway, like always. And I think this is a great concept. I agree totally that we have to make our streets more intelligent. Also, we have to make our cars more intelligent. But you're a Tesla driver, I think it's not.
That's not the problem. No. In fact, that really holds for all of the vehicles, right?
Yes.
Like we were talking about originally. Everybody's so focused on the personal car, but that's probably not going to be the vehicle of the future. One of the concepts that we discussed is that the vehicle of the future has to be modular and multimodal.
Yes.
So this was something that was in my presentation. For example, at CES 2019, Daimler announced something called the Urbanetic, which it separates the chassis, the skateboard, from the cabin. And this is a key part of what we're trying to do, is that for all of these cars that are coming out now, Rinspeed has one out of Switzerland, is the idea that a car maker makes a specific model that you get to buy forever, right?
Yes.
Is problematic. Instead, when you move to autonomous vehicles, you want to be able to assemble just in time the right kind of vehicle for the purpose. And that means that there have to be systems to put the chassis together with the various cabins, whether they're for passenger, for cargo, for retail shops, whatever that might be.
I think
and
Toyota
I see that
is working on a similar concept. I think they released something,
Toyota's e-Pilot was announced in 2018. We've got Renault that's announced half a dozen different models, from their Flex products to others. So, I've gone and looked at every one of the manufacturers and, even talked to Volvo about this as well, right, in great detail. And they're very interested in the next generation of autonomous cars being this kind of vehicle. And that's to really address the idea that it's not going to be owned by private citizens. In fact, I think one of the conversations I had with Let's many years ago was, there's, let's say, 50 million cars in Germany right now. And I'm saying that you're only going to need 5 to 7 million to replace them in an autonomous fleet.
Yes.
Right? And so a lot of that build out doesn't happen. But what does happen is the assumption that the existing auto industry will either have to adapt or collapse.
Yes. By the way, we have the number of cars has been growing last year by 1 million and the year before by 1.1 million. You can see we are coming to some kind of peak automotive, yeah. But something will happen and something must happen.
I think in the short term, at least what we're looking at is the establishment of moving away from rail, right? Because I know it's big in Germany, but moving more towards bus rapid transit type systems that share the roadways. As I don't know how much you have of that kind of stuff in Europe.
There's some concepts like Moya from Volkswagen.
Yeah. So, that's got the efficiencies of at least being able to transport large number of peoples in a single
Yes,
vehicle.
yes, yes. Chris, it was great talking to you, and I could talk to you for hours. It was very
So,
interesting and very interesting thoughts. I think we need to think and talk about it also later. But we have this 45-minute slot, so
yep.
we have to end here. But I thank you very much. It was a great pleasure talking to you, and I hope we will be talking soon again. Thanks a
Happy to
lot.
speak with you anytime. Have a great day.
Thanks. Same to you. Bye.
Cheers.